Have you ever heard of a warrior, a commander who designed the front lines and personally ruled the battlefields? A caliph, a protector of the Muslim Ummah, who gathered the might of an entire empire to answer the cry of a single imprisoned woman. His name was Al-Muatasim, son of kings, born in the golden age of Baghdad, yet destined to carve his legacy not in palaces but in the clash of steel. He raised an army that shook the Byzantine walls of Amorium, a force bound by loyalty and fear, forged under his unyielding command. To his enemies he was a storm, to his people he was a shield. This is the legend of the warrior caliph, Al-Mu'tasim. At the heart of the Abbasid dynasty stood a man whose name echoed beyond the borders of his empire. A caliph remembered not only for his armies, but for the golden glow of knowledge that lit his reign. His name was Harun al-Rashid. Under his rule, Baghdad became more than just a capital. It became a beacon, a center of learning, of poetry, of science, of invention. Scholars gathered in the great house of wisdom, translating texts, unlocking secrets from across the ancient world. Astronomers studied the stars. Physicians wrote about medicine and healing. Philosophers debated under candlelight, their words dancing in the air like smoke. But Harun was not only a patron of scholars, he was a ruler, a strategist, a man who understood the sword as well as the pen. His empire stretched wide, and his power held strong. Yet behind every powerful king stands a line of heirs. And among Harun's sons were men who would shape the fate of the Abbasid Caliphate. Some were known for their wisdom, others for their ambition, but there was one who would rise not through books or debate, but through strength, discipline, and the fire of his will. His name was Abu Ishaq Muhammad ibn Harun al-Rashid. The world would come to know him as Al-Mu'tasim. Born into the palace walls of Baghdad, Abu Ishaq Muhammad ibn Harun al-Rashid entered this world in the shadow of greatness. His father, Harun al-Rashid, ruled as one of the most powerful men on earth. His brothers were scholars, poets, and rulers in their own right. But Muhammad was different. While others studied scrolls, he trained with the sword. While others debated philosophy, he learned the weight of armor. From an early age, he was placed under the guidance of military instructors. His mornings began with discipline, drills, archery, horseback riding. His nights ended with the sharpening of steel. This was no scholar king in the making. This was a warrior, a man who understood that knowledge is power. But strength keeps power alive, and while he was not the first in line for the throne, his presence on the battlefield earned him the respect of soldiers long before he wore the crown. His name spread across the empire, not as a philosopher, but as a man of action, a leader who marched at the head of his armies, a leader whose hands held the reins, whose eyes watched the horizon. And so, in the minds of the people, when fear spread, when enemies gathered at the gates, when injustice was done, there was only one name they believed could bring justice. Only one man they believed would not turn away. That name was Al-Muatasim. Far away from the palaces of Baghdad, beyond the golden domes and the gardens of the caliphate, there stood the city of Amorium, a proud Byzantine fortress, its walls tall, its gates heavy, its defenders many. And there, inside those walls, was a prisoner, a Muslim woman, captured, alone, mocked by her captors, humiliated not only as a prisoner, but as a symbol of defiance crushed under boot. As the soldiers struck her, as they laughed at her pain, she cried out, not in desperation, but in faith. Wa Mu'tasimah, one name, one cry across the distance. And in that moment, the soldiers around her laughed. They spat their words at her like poison. What will he do, your mighty Mu'tasim? Will he ride here with 17,000 black horses and 17,000 white horses just for you? The words were meant to break her, but they did not know who they were mocking, for the story did not end within those walls. A fellow prisoner heard her cry, and whether through mercy or fortune, that prisoner escaped, carried her words, her scream for justice, across lands and deserts until they reached the ears of the Caliph himself, Al-Muatasim. The messenger arrived in Baghdad, breathless, exhausted, but driven by the weight of what he carried. He stood before the Caliph, before the man whose name had echoed across deserts and valleys. And he spoke of the woman's cry, of her humiliation, of the laughter of the Byzantine soldiers. And when Muʿtasim heard those words, when the insult was laid before him, the hall fell silent. No debate, no hesitation. His voice cut through the stillness like a blade. I will give her an answer that the world will remember. These were not just words. This was a vow. Muʿtasim stood. He called his generals. He commanded the assembly of one of the greatest armies of the Abbasid era. 17,000 black horses, 17,000 white horses, a force raised not for conquest, but for honor, for justice. A cry from a single prisoner had moved an entire empire to war. The banners were raised, the swords were sharpened. The Abbasid cavalry, black and white horses standing side by side, moved like a wave across the lands of Anatolia. The goal was not conquest, not to claim territory, but to send a message the world would not forget. At the head of this mighty force rode Al-Muatasim himself, not hiding behind walls, not sending generals in his place, but leading as a true commander. Days turned into weeks as the army crossed rivers, mountains, and plains. Step by step, their approach a shadow falling across the Byzantine lands. And then, before them stood Amorium, a city proud and defiant, stone walls towering into the sky, Byzantine soldiers lining the ramparts, confident behind their defenses. But Muʿtasim was not a man of rash attacks. He was patient, methodical. He ordered his army to surround the city completely, cutting off every supply line. No food, no water, no escape. Siege towers were raised. Catapults were rolled into place. Every strike, every stone hurled toward the walls carried the weight of that woman's cry. The Byzantines laughed no more. Days turned into weeks. The Siege of Amorium pressed on without mercy. The catapults hurled stone and fire. The siege towers crept closer to the walls, step by step. Night and day, the Abbasid army kept their rhythm, patient, relentless. Inside the fortress, the defenders' hope began to crumble. Supplies ran thin, morale ran thinner. They had laughed once, but now only the sound of siege engines and breaking stone filled the air. Then, at last, the breach. A section of the mighty walls shattered under the weight of the siege. The Abbasid forces surged forward, storming through the gap like a flood released from a dam. Steel clashed against steel, shields broke, arrows darkened the sky, and in the heart of the chaos, the captives were found. Among them, the woman, the one whose voice had called out not in despair, but in defiance. And then came the moment. Al-Muatasim, the Caliph himself, rode into the city, not hidden behind his ranks, not shielded by distance, but there, present among his soldiers. He dismounted. He stood before the woman whose cry had shaken an empire, and he spoke the words that would be remembered for generations to come. Here stands Muʿtasim, with black horses and white horses, in answer to your call. The vow was fulfilled, the world remembered. The Siege of Amorium was not the largest battle of the Abbasid era, nor was it the bloodiest, but its meaning cut deeper than any sword, because this was not about conquest. This was about principle, about standing against humiliation, about answering injustice wherever it may be found. And though Al-Muatasim would rule until the year 842, it is this story, this moment, that has carved his name into the stones of history. A story told not just in chronicles, but whispered between generations. Here stands Muḥtasim with black and white horses in answer to your call. A vow kept, a legend born, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest power of a ruler is the will to rise for the weakest among us.